Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Scott, welcome back. It's been a while. You've been vacationing. You've been exploring the world.
The Northwest where I live, pretty much.
Did you go hiking or something?
Yeah, I did. I went to a rodeo, and I'm not a big fan of rodeos. But that's kind of, I live in the Northwest, and not everything is Portlandia here. We do have some weird, like, cultural differences just
Naked
within
bicycle
Oregon.
people, I heard about.
Well, there you go. Exactly. So we took the family to a rodeo. Really, it was the grandparents that was a big motivator, and so we did some camping. And I've been traveling around Oregon and checking out some of the non-Portlandian stuff and getting out into the country. I mean, well, you're from the Northeast, is that right?
I'm in a beach town. Yeah.
You're in a beach town, so I mean, it's not desert, right?
No,
It's beautiful out there.
it's kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really windy and cold right now because Florida's going through some crap, and we're getting the tail end of that.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the Northwest, generally speaking, it's pretty green and lush, but there are deserts in Oregon, which is an interesting thing. So I kind of, went out and checked out the state and areas that I hadn't been in before. And yeah, kind of getting back into life. School's starting, and got a dang puppy. I don't know if you heard about that on the podcast, but I got a golden doodle as a puppy, and it's chewing on everything, and it's creating all kinds of havoc. It's like having a newborn kid. I hate it. So, but my wife loves it. Well, it's kind of her dog. So
Happy wife,
she better
happy
love it.
life, man. Happy wife, happy life.
Yeah. Well, I'm just waiting for the little puppy face to get over with because I'm tired of losing my shoes and worse stuff.
You took a break from your show for a little while. I'm curious. Did it get a lot? I know call it never too serious, but it seems like every time you're talking about some pretty big stuff.
It's kind of ironic, I guess. I mean, we like to kid around a little bit and not make it terribly serious, but yeah, we talk about serious topics, and I just like interesting stuff. But yeah, we took a break, mainly because school was out. We were starting to do vacationing stuff, and we kind of needed to just do some other things and refresh and come back. And so we've been posting episodes now that the school year has started. We're kind of back into our routines, and so Dave and I have been posting new episodes. And in fact, I think the next one's going to launch on Monday.
You still teach, right? Or coach?
I'm the IT guy. So I work in public education, and I do computer stuff. And then I also do javelin stuff, and that's mostly during the season. I do it for the school, but pretty much year round I do private lessons.
Do you get nervous about like your students finding your podcast, or because like I have a couple like there's a couple like nice ladies and friends that are
Hmm.
teachers, and I mean, dude, one of them has like an OnlyFans Instagram basically, and I'm like, I know for a fact I would have shown up every day to school if you were my teacher. But I'm just curious, like, what happens if your students find that and they see you like naked on a horse? Like, I don't know what it means, but damn it, if you didn't get a like out of me about it.
For a while I was kind of concerned about, the different parts of my life, that I kind of keep separate. I keep my family life kind of separate from my work life. My coaching life is kind of a blend because it's me. I teach kids how to throw the javelin, and I can kind of be myself in that environment. There are some things you have to, you got to be the responsible adult and not do irresponsible stuff, but I'm generally that way anyway. With the podcast, it's an interesting blend because now I really don't want people's opinion of me to change based on the show that I do. And it's not like it's really super controversial stuff, but I claim to be a libertarian, and I live in an environment where there's a lot of like liberal, like Democrat, like New World Democrat beliefs. And I work with a lot of those folks. A lot of the clients that I have, their parents are that way. And so having more of a libertarian take in my personal life, which the podcast kind of reflects, I didn't want that to be a conflict when people work with me in a different capacity. And my hope is that, the world hasn't gone completely to shit, and that people can, meet in the middle about whatever it is that whatever service you're getting. It's not going to be tainted by some other belief that is going to interrupt whatever it is, like, if I'm coaching or if I'm doing IT support. Um, and so far I haven't run into that conflict, but I'm sure it'll happen at some point. I mean, you do a podcast with tons of different people. Your opinion comes through. Do you ever worry about that yourself?
No, the only thing is it gets a little bit, I consider myself politically homeless. So I don't really like, I think that if you try, like, I had a guy that I was going to talk to about corruption, and he was like, just real quick before I do your show, where do you stand like politically? And I was like, I don't really vote, and I don't really think like the president has any power at all. And he's like, what? And I'm just like, if you're going to look for corruption, right? Just hear me out. If you're going to look for corruption, if you're on the left side and you verify yourself as I'm on the left, then you're going to be more likely to look at the right side than rather than look at it in your own. You know what I mean? You're going to be more happy to point it out in the other one than look into yourself. And I think that's, you can't be on a political side. Then if you're really going to look for corruption, you have to acknowledge wherever it is. And then he was like, all right, I don't want to do your show. I was like, all right, that's fine. Sorry. That's how I feel. I think when you look at things like damn it, if you look at things like deep state is how I think of it. And every single person I'm talking to, like JFK people, CIA people, intelligence explorers, all these types of people, they're like teachers, they're historians, and they're more lefts, and that's fine. I don't really care. But like it gets into this thing where next thing you know, someone's ranting about Trump. It's like Jesus Christ, like just stick to the thing. We don't need to make new explorations into more modern day topics. And I'm like, look, deep state's real. And they're like, oh, that's conspiracy talk. I'm like, what about Bohemian Grove? And then they just go silent. I'm like, yeah, because we have the Nixon tapes, and Nixon makes a public statement about Bohemian Grove, so it's true. And then I don't know. I don't tend to worry. Sometimes I take a nap. I get a little, I feel better. I don't know.
I try and be self-aware, at least enough to know whether what I'm saying is making them feel uncomfortable. I try and pick up on body language, and you know, I pick up on things that people have done or said in the past, and I kind of formulate where these safe avenues are. I I'm relatively an anti-conflict sort of person. So I don't like arguing with people. I love debating. I love talking about different stuff because I'm fascinated by a lot of things, but I'm not interested in offending people. I'm not interested in trying to goat them into sort of a conflict conversation, conflicting viewpoints, political viewpoints. You know, believe it or not, I'm an atheist, and a lot of people are offended by that. And so I know if I'm talking to a religious person that I'm not going to start bashing on their religious belief. Now I can have conversations with them and kind of pick their brain and learn a little bit more, but I'm not going to go in there and try and impose my beliefs onto them and try and get them, get a rise out of them. I'm just not interested in that. I'm much more into let's have a great conversation and, come in as friends and leave as friends.
You're
And
right.
that's the way I try and operate at work and at, coaching and within the podcast, and somewhat at home. My wife and I don't always agree on everything, which is fine. But I try and avoid the conflict to the point where sometimes it's a lame conversation. If that makes sense.
I just tried to find the Bohemian Grove statement that Nixon made.
Mm-hmm.
I have it that we could play.
What?
Have you ever heard of it before?
No. Well, I mean, I've heard. I don't know. I don't know the story behind it, but I have heard of it.
So I don't know if you know what the Nixon tapes are. I've talked to a couple people. I'm just going to keep exploring deeper into it to get it, but Nixon taped a lot of stuff on his own. Now it's not the best quality, and the one I'm going to show you is, you know what Bohemian Grove is, right?
No, I've only heard the term. I don't know much. I don't know anything about it.
What?
Give me.
Oh my
Look at
God!
the shock in your face.
Holy shit, dude! It was
Okay,
like
give me
Bill
the
Clinton,
synopsis here.
Reagan, all these people dressed up in fucking cloaks in front of an owl statue, basically lighting an effigy of a small child in front of Moloch, the owl god, which is this demon that takes child sacrifices. And even though he's in the news right now getting shit on, Alex Jones is the one that got a video of it, and he was like, Danny Glover's there, fucking Clint Eastwood was there, and it's like this, like,
this is early Alex Jones.
so there's a video of that, and then there's this famous footage that I'll show you right now, and I just want to let people know it's Nixon was taping these, so this is how you verify that it's true, but it's really crappy quality because he had no idea what the hell he was doing. And I'm going to play this, and you get to hear him mention it. You have to read probably the subtitles. Let me know when it's sharing on screen.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So play it real quick. Where's the sound?
Let's look at Northern California. You understand? Yeah. You know what San Francisco just gone. It's clear over. I know that, but it isn't. This is just down in the rowdy part of town. But the upper class in San Francisco is that way. The Bohemian Grove that I attend on time to time. The Easterners and the others that come there. But it is the most faggy goddamn thing you will ever imagine. A San Francisco crowd that goes in there. It's just terrible. I don't want to shake hands with anybody in San Francisco.
So the importance of what that meant was that what they do is they basically go in the woods and they sex and all these weird ritual stuff like we see furries do and people do at Burning Man and shit. They do that. And these are like our main politicians and stuff like that, where I just go, that's like when people say there's no such thing as a deep state. Understand that like every single person that ends up going into the government was a part of a fraternity. I mean, George Bush's grandfather allegedly stole Geronimo's skull. Like there was the family that from the Skull and Bone Society. There's an articles about it, and you just start realizing I looked into every president, and this is what like my buddy Joe Green calls the weirdness, where he like sometimes he'll talk about it on air, sometimes he won't. So if he's listening to this, Joe, we got to do an episode on it. But if you look at like all these people that are in like presidents, they all have like really weird shit going on in their life. I mean, Lyndon Johnson walking around naked around, the White House, showing his like nuts to people. He would piss on Secret Service members' shoes and poop with the door open and have them come talk to him. That's why the Secret Service members did not like him for that. And it's not just that though, like George Bush, his grandfather, weird stuff that was going on. And then probably with him as well too. Then you look at things like Nixon had the war on drugs, but Nixon was also lying and cheating and doing a lot of things. I mean, there's like a whole thing of like, you start realizing like the war on drugs. I mean, did they create that on purpose to get people off drugs because they couldn't control it? I mean, any weird kind of ideas that go out there, but I think everything's kind of validated because you start looking Hunter Biden laptop, Trump's weird issues as well.
But
too.
don't you think that so much of this is like a certain type of I mean, a famous person, a celebrity type or a politician who's got some power. Don't you think you find a lot of this weird stuff with that tier of person?
No,
Like, I don't think this
they
is a
got dirt on you,
normal.
bro. That's how they get you. Is that you basically if you do something bad, you basically in the government you fail upwards. So what happens is if you do something incredibly, like you take the cover for something, you take the blame for something, a scandal. A big example, the Franklin scandal. Now, if you look at the Franklin scandal, it was about like I think it was I actually had a CIA guy on my show to talk about it, and it was the one episode I didn't post because it got really awkward. His name's John Prados. He's pretty popular. People know listening to this. I still have the episode recording. I'm not posting it. It's just it got really awkward. It ended quick. Because I was like, because asked him about this and I didn't know about it at the time. And he was like, there's no such thing. And then I Googled it and looked it up and pulled it up on air. And it is real. It was about CIA trafficking children. And it was this thing. And now it's labeled as a Franklin hoax. Now there's a guy out there, Nick Bryant, who does a podcast. He's spoken to the survivors of the Franklin hoax. And you realize like so many things that the government can do, especially early days before we have. I mean, they labeled the Hunter Biden thing a lie. They said it was disinformation. Mark Zuckerberg on a podcast talked about how the FBI came to him and told him there's Russian disinformation going around. Yeah.
That was unbelievable. I mean, for him to like no one know about it, and then to him to come out on that podcast and actually admit to it, I was shocked. Like, why wouldn't you keep it quiet even on that? I mean, if you've kept it quiet that long, why would you admit it
Because
to it?
they screwed him over. That was around the same time that Facebook whistleblower came out and he was up in court all awkward as shit. Because he was in his head, he was like, I'm not gonna say anything right now that would sink you because they'll shoot me in the head, but I'm gonna get you guys back somehow. And that's what they threw him under the bus. The FBI investigated him, a bunch of people did.
Isn't that just a crazy thing though? That I mean, there's so much evidence for that to be it's true, but it was labeled misinformation, disinformation. It was quieted. Even today, right now, there's still a lot of folks that really don't believe that that's even a true thing.
I'm not even complaining about it. All I want to say is that we need to have an atheist president. Because I'm like, if they're doing all this stuff, who gives a shit if they're Christian or Catholic? Like, to be 100% honest, it's like all we go for. Like, to run for president, you have to be a Christian, you have to be this. I'm like, at this point, we should just accept an atheist. He's going to be fucking in the woods at some point. So it's like, obviously, our track record isn't the best. So I'm just like, and maybe all of them weren't that bad. I mean, Franklin D. Roosevelt seemed like he was an okay guy, but also I think they killed him too. But if you read his journals are interesting. He describes Bigfoot. It's in he has a journal. It's like something, the ultimate hunt of something. It has a weird name to it, but he describes this Sasquatch like creature. And he talks about, I think it's his friend talks about killing one. And I mean, is that real? I don't know. The FBI did an investigation into Bigfoot. You can look that up too. They have records. They have hair in their whole thing.
We have a Bigfoot museum not too far from me. And I've been talking to my co-host Dave to go and do that with me, but it's an expensive ticket to get in, and it's not a big building, and I'm not a big believer in Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but I'm fascinated by it, and eventually I'm going to get there. Eventually.
What hurts to entertain stuff? Like, that's what I don't get is like people like, so shouldn't have this, disinformation on your show. I'm just like, dude, fucking chillax. It's a free show. Like, Coast to Coast was the longest running thing because people like that paranormal.
Isn't Coast to Coast still around?
Yeah, they're still doing shows, but I think most people tuned out because Art Bell was like the one that had he had that lady. What is it, Madam? What is her name? Madam Clarice is her name. Where she would be like, I will tell you your fortune, and when you'll be charged, you'll hear the ding. And then you would hear a ding. You're like, is that you charging me? And it wasn't her, because she gives you like 5 minutes free or something like that. And then right when she tells you the fortunes, when she starts charging you. And she had people like that call. I mean, that's what the radio shows, like not podcasts. Podcasts are kind of the new form, but old school radio shows where a dude would be talking about they're poisoning the Gatorade. And let me tell you about the Gatorade. The Gatorade is filled with fluoride. Why does the government care about your teeth? Yeah. And you're like, damn it, he's got a point. Why does the government care about my teeth that they're putting fluoride in the water?
Yeah. I used to watch a lot of Art, or not watch, but listen to a lot of Art Bell when I was in high school and in towards my early college years. The first time, I did a lot of delivery, like courier service stuff, and it was late at night, and I would listen to Coast, and it would carry me through the evening of picking up and deliveries. And I was so fascinated by it. And this is way back when I was really not that much of a skeptical person. And so the stories and, the stuff that they were claiming to be real, I was, hook, line, sinker on a lot of that stuff. Eventually, I think, was it George Norrie that he took over? I can't remember.
I don't think his last name's Norrie. I think it's George Knapp.
Is it George Knapp?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not.
I know that there's a George Knapp who also was a host, but he was a reporter because he did a lot of UFO reporting with what's the guy's name?
It's George Noorey. So it might be Nuri.
Yeah,
That's how you said it.
Nori.
I don't know.
Yeah, but Knapp was also, I think he was did some hosting stuff too. But I'm trying to remember the guy who was Area 51 UFO
Well,
guy.
what's your stopping
Anyway.
points? Like, what do you hear that you just can't get with? If you say Kennedy, I'll
Um,
convince you right now.
no. I totally no. I think I don't know. I just think I like to dig into the details and know a little bit more. Kennedy, there's a ton of stuff, so that's a hard one for me to know all the details about. But I think that like I said, I'm an atheist, and so I now have a real skeptical perspective on most everything, and so I like to ask questions and dig in and figure out, if that seems plausible. I'm really evidence based. Like I want to actually see evidence. There's a lot of speculation in everything, and I think it's fun to explore it. My co-host Dave, he loves conspiracy stuff, and I have a tendency to just I'm fascinated, but not believe 99% of it.
At some point, I'm going into the Princess Diana subject on my show. Um, I got to know that one. I've never even heard of it, and then I watched a documentary. I was like, Jesus. But I mean, the issue with that is when you say that you don't do speculation. I like to go by documents too. That's what I've only been going by on the Kennedy thing. Like I'll talk to someone and I'll get their perspective, but I strictly need a document to kind of verify it as well too. But a lot of that stuff, like the CIA, they destroyed a lot of documents. I mean, we only know about MK Ultra because a whistleblower found the transcripts that were in a warehouse. They destroyed most of them when Sidney Gottlieb and Joyanne West, some of the two main people, left. And the crazy thing is, if you look up MK Ultra survivors right now, you'll see news articles for Montreal in 2018, Montreal in 2020, and they're suing the government. You can look up their lawsuits. Some people have been paid out, but you got to think they destroyed the documentation, so now there's no proof. But here's where I say the weird stuff is: if you look up MK Ultra, it'll give you a rundown of giving people drugs, experimenting on them, shocking them, doing a bunch of stuff. Now, here's my example. The government has not said that these were false at all, and they haven't corrected them. So that means whatever they actually did is way worse than what people are just talking about. Because MK Ultra leads into Operation Midnight Climax. It leads into the Manson murders. It leads into so much. Where did they create the Unabomber? He was in government institute.
There's still research going on that was done with MK Ultra. I mean, this is the direction that a lot of like neuroscience has gone, because MK Ultra had universities and others participating in research, and they didn't know, as far as I know, they didn't know that this was backed by a government, program.
Well, here's the
Um,
scary thing is that the government hasn't corrected anybody, like hasn't corrected the Wikipedia, hasn't done any of that. That means if I said that, Scott, if I said something and I labeled you something that you just didn't agree with, you would correct me on it because you're like, that's not true. The government hasn't done that. And if they haven't done it, that means whatever they did is way fucking worse. I mean, we know that's the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, where we were creating psychological warriors and they were giving people drugs and stuff to try and get these remote viewing powers and all that. We know that's real and that's documented. And the we just don't know how big it was. I mean, Ewan Cameron was the biggest guy in Canada that was experimenting on people and making them basically go crazy with drugs. So, I mean, that's the part when we talk about speculation, it's needed in some sense. I mean, the Blue Sky memo was found out during the Clinton administration. Mostly it was like it's kind of, if you look it up, it's kind of tied in with like some 9/11 stuff, but they talked about a lot of things that are just vocally said rather than written down, and it was between two people, and that's where you look through history. I mean, Cold War, all these types of things. There's a giant fear that your documents would be stolen by Russian agents. And I had a guy on my show who talked to one of these people. I think it's I don't think it's Guy Little is his name, and he comes up a lot like in the Kennedy assassination. He comes up. He was a Cold War basically like intelligence operative guy. Some of the people he trained, one of his closest people was a Russian spy. And he ended up quitting his job or leaving after that because he just felt like he let the whole institution down, but he didn't know. And it's like, oh shit. Like you start looking through the documents, they were planting fake documents in our archives on purpose to make sure that in case a Russian agent came across it, they would run off with fake information. And it's just like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and it just kind of muddies everything.
yeah. So when you say
Mhm.
conspiracy, when we say speculation, it's just like I think you can validate everything. I think you could choose to believe in whatever. And there's obviously points like birds aren't real. I don't get with that. I have a buddy I have a buddy who believes that, but I think
What?
when you really look into like a lot of stuff, I'm like you, rational, evidence-based. But I mean, if you had one stop, you can't say religion because that's just a religious thing. That's like a spiritual thing. That's not really conspiracy. That's just kind of like
Well, I think I mean, within organizations, yeah, there can be a lot of different conspiracy. I mean, like real conspiracy, not like the theories or whatever, but there's real conspiracy to maintain the integrity of the organization. Different. What do they say? A cult with enough time becomes a religion. There's some structure to a lot of religions. The one that I came from, it's a massive structure, and so there's real conspiracies within that organization and many others in order to maintain the followers, to maintain the integrity of that organization. uh, I just think that sometimes things are based early on about things that are not true, and you tell enough people often enough and the not true becomes true. And that's kind of where I've kind of found myself in a lot of this stuff. Dave and I did a show on DB Cooper
I
recently.
know. I want to talk about that because I have no idea who DB Cooper is. I know he like stole
It's
money and disappeared.
it's a very fascinating story because it's an unsolved mystery right now, and it's from 1970.
Well, he's
Um,
Loki. It said in the
and
Marvel show.
I did see that. That's really funny. Yeah, DB Cooper is a very interesting story because it is still unsolved. There's not much real evidence that's left over. The story is that this guy Dan Cooper, chartered a flight from Portland to Seattle, and in that process claimed to
Jesus
have
Christ, he went from Portland to Seattle.
it's really short. It's like a half-hour flight.
I wasn't even gonna say that, but it's like that's
Yeah, I
like going
mean,
to hell to hell. Like it's just like go somewhere nice. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
it's really funny. I've taken that flight quite a few times, and I had to circle back on one of those trips because the weather was so bad it freaked me out. I mean, we were actually going in for a landing and pulled out just before landing.
There's
It
no window washers in
was
Seattle because it
crazy.
just rains all the fucking
You don't
time.
need window washers, exactly. You just need a good wind once in a while.
None of those people are happy. I'm sorry
No, 'cause
if they're
it's
from
depressing.
Seattle.
So anyway, so DB Cooper charters a flight, um, claims to have a bomb with him, tells one of the flight attendants, "I got a bomb, and here are my demands." Demands that he has like $200,000 in U.S. currency, and says he needs 4 parachutes. So they give him 4 parachutes when they get to Seattle. The folks on board had no idea. They exit the plane. All the reporters are there, and hey, you're on the flight, that was hijacked. And everyone was like, "What? What are you talking about?" So it was done very, very quietly. He takes off. They give him the money. They give him the 4 parachutes. 2 are sport parachutes. 2 are like the military non-steering type of parachutes. They refuel, get it back up in the air, and he wants to go to like Mexico, and the pilot says, "No, don't have enough fuel for that. How about Reno instead?" And for some reason, he says, "Sure," and then re you know changes direction, go towards Reno, and then he jumps out of the back of this plane, and has never been heard from again. And the FBI investigates it, and that's where a lot of this stuff gets a little weird because they find money on the beach that's upriver from where they know that he exited the plane, which is a very odd thing. The rest of the money, that was like that was almost $6,000. The rest of it never been found. None of the serial numbers have ever been checked, or excuse me, never been um, found, except for that stack of almost six grand that they found on the beach that was again, upriver of where it landed.
Wait, so they found $6,000 on the beach, and then he had a total of 194,000 left.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and none of that money has ever been found or recovered except for that one batch. And then there's a whole bunch of people that became copycats of DB Cooper. And then I mean, there's been a whole bunch of like citizen sleuths that go out and try and figure this stuff out, and they have, I mean, it's become this big like cult following almost of all these people who are trying to solve this case. The FBI has tons of different documentation, interviewed thousands of people, have different, sketches of DB Cooper, and then they've compared it with other people that they've interviewed, and nothing has ever fully checked out. They don't think that they've ever actually found him, and they don't know for sure if he survived or if he died jumping out of the plane, but they've never heard of him since. It's a crazy, you're talking about getting into JFK and, having like, your mind blown with all the stuff. DB Cooper has blown up to be this massive thing because there's not much evidence left over from the actual hijacking. And the details of it are interesting because he asked for 4 parachutes of 2 different varieties. He smoked on the flight, but those cigarettes were not in evidence. The note that he passed to the stewardess was recovered by him. He asked for it back. The tie that he was wearing, he left on the plane, and that tie had little specks of. They've done some forensic studies on it, and the tie has some. I believe it's like this commercial grade titanium specks in it. And so then people kind of jump to these conclusions about, well, where, back in the 70s, that was like a rare material that was really only used for like military development, like not done in commercial airplanes, not used in regular everyday stuff. So how could that tie have this material in it? But that was left on the plane, but he got his ransom note back. It's very odd. So you could go down a path of all this different speculation, but ultimately, we still don't know.
What do you think?
It's crazy. I think it's totally a survivable thing. I think that he probably did get out. My thought is that he got away and he spent the rest of his life silent about it. I I would guess that someone else could have supported him in this process. But anytime that you have more than one person involved in something like this, then you have to worry about the other person also staying quiet and not doing things that would jeopardize the success of it. There was some speculation about him having military experience because of the parachutes that he asked for, the one that he chose to put on, and he knew enough about the plane. So one of the details is that he was flying, back from Seattle down towards like Reno, and he gave specific instructions to the pilot that they needed to fly under 10,000 feet at a certain speed and with the flaps down. And that plane, I think it was a 727 maybe. Back in the day, the rear stairs would actually fold down to the direct rear of the plane, and back then you could lower that thing while you're still flying, and he knew that somehow. He also knew that with the flaps down and under a certain altitude and certain speed that he could make this jump. And the other thing is they had 2 fighter jets that were trailing the plane, but the fighter jets couldn't fly slow enough, so they had to keep breaking off and circling back. So they have a pretty good idea of where he jumped, what the weather conditions were at the time, where, the direction that they were flying. But they were going so slow that the fighter jets had to keep circling back during the process. And so and this was
So he
at
timed
night.
it.
So he must have timed it right. But I mean, this had been going on for quite a few hours. So you would think that with the timing of him jumping out of the plane, the pilots are on radio with authorities, and when they notice that the rear stairs are down and the pressure change within the plane, they knew at what point in that flight that he jumped off. And with the wind conditions, they have a pretty good idea of where he would have ended up, but they found nothing, no parachute, no no remnants of anything from that jump. So he just like disappeared. It's the I mean, it had to have been like the perfect crime, because if he would have landed, died, that sort of thing, there would be someone would have found a parachute and and a dead body someplace. But they didn't find any of those things.
Okay, what do you think though? Like, what do you personally? Because I'm starting to think like, I mean, I could go. Was it staged? Was it did that on purpose to create a myth, so then people start looking into it and spend all their time researching into it, and then you don't learn about Bohemian Grove? Um,
Is this just
or
a bell and whistle distraction?
yeah, so I mean, it could be that, or they just ignored it and completely didn't bother. I mean, if they did an investigation into it, it seemed like it was of a somewhat of an importance, whether it was a shabby job or not. I mean, was a rogue element of some type of agency that, there's these things that you do come across where agencies, much like during the pandemic, where like hospitals started calling people like deaths, calling them COVID and all this to get money, which was in the beginning, that was happening. Um, was it an agency doing that? Like getting money for a certain base, a certain project, a certain this. I mean, eventually the government was doing so many projects, and then around Kennedy, I mean, what time period was this?
This is in the late 70s.
I mean, that's close to like Nixon's administration, Watergate scandals coming out a little bit after that, and you just get to this point of like, I mean, I don't know. I learned a lot of like the stuff, especially with Nixon. Like he was he, he thought he was the president, so he could control the FBI and all this. Well, you got to go through J. Edgar Hoover to get the FBI under your thing, and then when J. Edgar Hoover died, there was a large, like, the new director that took over the FBI did not like Nixon and was more than willing to throw him under the bus on some things. Like nobody was doing what Nixon wanted because they all wanted him out, and that's where he gets him. He ends up getting impeached, and you just get to this point of like, is it a rogue element that is getting money because now they're not being funded by the main thing, so they have to figure out creative ways to get theirs? I mean, that would explain, unless he worked at an airplane thing and he was.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is there's a whole bunch of speculation about who this guy was based on what some of the details of the story. He smoked a bunch of cigarettes. I don't know if it was like 6 or more, 8 something cigarettes, which were not recovered evidently, or were not in evidence as of today. He drank a bourbon and 7, and
7 Up.
yeah, and he knew to have the to ask for 4 parachutes of 2 different variety. He refused the instructions for the parachute from the stewardess, and he knew enough to ask for his note back, but he left his tie. He knew enough about the plane, about his flight characteristics, to be able to jump out of the back. He must have known enough about parachutes to be confident that he could do, that jump. It's 200 grand. Evidently it was in $20 bills, which is a fair amount of money if you're getting it in 20s.
Is that going to fit in a suitcase though?
And yeah, I mean, it's I think it was like 20 something pounds of cash, and
That's
it was
like
all
when you go to
bundled.
TSA and they're like, it's 5 pounds over, and you're like trying to find every way to cram the thing down.
Right, you're stuffing it in your socks. Yeah. I would have asked for $100 bills. I wouldn't have asked for 20s, but he didn't even ask for 20s. They just gave it to him.
If he's going to Mexico, wait. Oh, I'm so confused.
So here's the other thing. So he asked for U.S. currency. If you're an American, why would you ask for U.S. currency, and why wouldn't you specify the denomination?
Well, if you transfer over US dollars into Mexico, it's way more. It's like you'll be if you're getting $200,000 and you're trying to transfer that over to Mexican currency, I think our dollar is worth like 10 of theirs or something like that.
Yeah, but he already knew that he was going to jump out of the plane. So he didn't even care when they switched it to Reno because he had planned on not making it to the final destination. He was going to jump out. I mean, I think
Or maybe he thought he could
his
hitch a
plan.
ride to Mexico.
I mean, who knows? But people speculate this guy had to have had military experience. So they started looking for people that would have this military experience. There was, Dave makes the comment. He's like, well, there was no YouTube. So this guy had to have done a whole bunch of research and spent a lot of time or had the experience. Which is it? Was he just really dedicated to learning about these things because he felt like this could be the best crime, the best way to get away with it? Or did he just have the experience? Was he a military guy? Was he a special ops person? Because some of the people that eventually that they found were special ops, had military experience. One in particular that is kind of fascinating, Bob Rackstraw, had experience in the military and with some potential covert operations, maybe even tied to some CIA stuff. So who knows there? But
What about
what was the
mafia
motivation?
connection?
I mean, who knows? I mean, was this a guy who just was pissed off and wanted to get back at something?
So around the time, especially during Kennedy's administration, it was happening before that too with Eisenhower. But the reason why Bay of Pigs was such an issue, the Bay of Pigs, everyone wanted, Kennedy was supposed to supply air support. He didn't. The reason why people say Bay of Pigs is Kennedy's biggest mess up, to me, I consider it his biggest success, because what he did is he openly stated, I'm the executive chief, I'm the president, I'm in charge of these institutions, and I take full responsibility for what happened. Even though he told them he wasn't going to supply air support, but the government just figured every president has done, went back and they've ended up doing it in the long run. So Kennedy will be the same. And he didn't do it. And good thing he didn't, because there was Russia had nuclear missiles over there and stuff like that, which should have been a whole world war if that would have happened. But the organized crime angle, and that is that the CIA was hiring mafia people like Jack Ruby, who was a strip club owner, like Johnny Roselli, and a couple like what they call the rogue elements. They're mafia people. They're connected in this aspect. And this is what I recently talked to a guy who talked about there's 18 and a half minutes that are missing on the Nixon tapes. And what they think is there's a statement from Nixon where he goes, I don't think the CIA wants to repeat the whole Bay of Pigs fiasco. And everyone goes, what does he mean by that? And Traficante, a head mafia guy, in an interview talked about how this 18 minutes of missing tape is about the Kennedy assassination. And they took it out and they think that it was the mafia aspect. And that's, like I said, that's one angle, just like the DB Cooper thing. There's a bunch of angles. But I mean, they had 693 attempted assassination attempts on Castro. Roselli and a lot of these mafia guys were delivering poison cigars, explosive cigars, all these types of things. None of them worked, but the mafia had a lot of money invested in Cuba, much like not all the presidents, but some of the presidents would go down to Cuba and gamble. It was like Reno. So you get to this aspect of could it have been one of these individual mafia actors that had a lot of experience already, maybe weren't under the guise of the institution, but during the investigation, maybe why it's so shabby is because they realized how during 9/11, we trained the people that ended up biting us in the ass, that type of thing. They realized, oh shit, we trained a mafia guy like this and we think we know who it is. And if that comes out, then he's just going to throw all our shit out to the wind. So let's shit the investigation. And that's why there's might be a lot of errors and stuff. It's the same thing with the Kennedy assassination. There's a lot of weird things, but why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? Why is Jack Ruby's mother's dental records in the fucking Warren Commission? That doesn't make sense. She's not even got the guy who killed Oswald's fucking mother's dental records. Why the hell are you getting those? They were thorough, just not in how you should have been thorough. So it's like they were going to give you a lot of BS, a lot of fluff, just to make it look like they actually did something. But when you actually start examining all the evidence, you're like, you missed this aspect. You didn't check the cigarettes. You didn't do any of that. And they realize they know who this individual actor is. I think one of the agents that gets mentioned in the Kennedy assassination, I don't know if it's Roselli. I could be mistaken. So I'm just going to say, I don't think it's Harvey. But he was like a James Bond, real life James Bond. He talked about walking up to the White House with a pistol on his hip. Like he's not Secret Service. He's just acted like people. There's a lot of documents saying like he's kind of uncontrollable in a sense. Like he was known for that. And they sent him to Rome as a punishment. Like they sent him to Rome, and they asked him when he was taking a flight to Dallas before Kennedy was killed. They go, "What are you doing? What are you going to Dallas for?" "I'm just going to look around." What? So that's where his name gets drawn in. But I say there's individual actors like that that are involved in CIA, the FBI. I mean, it was not strange during the Great Depression that Al Capone was feeding people soup. You think Al Capone did it out of the kindness of their heart, or is he trying to win people's favors? And then you get into the war on terror, the war on gangs. Well, it's because the government wasn't controlling people anymore. And it started to be like, oh, we're going to listen to Al Capone. He might be a mafia guy, but he was also feeding us when we had nothing. And you realize like everyone's batting for the public's opinion and the way that they can distort your opinion to either hate somebody or love somebody.
Well, it's interesting to think about, like, the DB Cooper was it was the first hijacking in the United States. And there were copycats after that, and so much changed about airport security as a result of it.
Can't smoke on airplanes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things that, because that thing happened, there were so many other things that happened after, and it's changed the world that we live in right now when it comes to travel. I
Is
mean,
that why in
9/11
9/11 they
obviously
just
was a big
shot
one.
the plane down? They didn't bother giving them money. They're like, fuck this. We know it's a DB Cooper situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but one of the suspects was Bob Rackstraw, and there's a documentary on Netflix that talks about him and his military experience and the potential that he was just he wanted to get back at the government somehow because of the things that they did, to wrong him or something. But just to have the experience makes sense, but then to do the research, I mean, who knows how long this guy was planning to do this sort of thing, and what was the real motive behind it. A lot of these other things, like, Oswald, motivation to do it, but JFK, there's so many details that just seem to be conflicting, and there's so many holes. And then, I mean, it's very confusing for me to follow all of those different things, and the number of conspiracy theories that have come out since, based on, the Warren report and some of these other things. With DB Cooper, the FBI was the lead investigating organization, and now there's a whole bunch of these citizen sleuths. The FBI was sued by one of these citizen sleuths, and the FBI now has to basically open up all of their documents, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that they have to do it over a certain period of time. So they're doing it in sequential order, and so we're getting a little bit more detail about the work that they did investigating this. And so it's just all very confusing, because the citizen sleuths have gone certain directions and have actually done a pretty good job of uncovering more stuff. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the amount of real physical evidence that's left over is very, very small. And that's why it just has grown into this massive. I mean, there's a place, what is it? Is it Ariel? I think it's Ariel, Washington. And there's a pub there that everyone goes and meets at, and they have, all these folks that are involved in investigating it show up, and they have a good time, and they kind of tell stories back and forth. There's a pub, I think, in Vancouver, Washington, that has all of these beers that are named after DB Cooper. The whole place is themed out for DB Cooper, which, by the way, the DB part of DB Cooper is actually a misprint in a newspaper. It was supposed to be Dan Cooper, and then they picked up DB somehow, and now DB stuck. And that's not even, DB has nothing to do with the case. It's just the resulting name that they gave it, and it has nothing to do with it. So it always makes me wonder, how much more has the media gotten wrong in this particular story? And that's why I think the information coming from the FBI might be more reliable. But then when I talk to you, I go, well, shit, that's not reliable because it's the FBI. Because it's a government organization. And how are they actually getting the right, accurate, factual information?
Well, I'll have to send you some episodes I did about like the FBI invasion into Hollywood, looking for communists. They have files on Frank Sinatra, Walt Disney. A lot of people don't know, and I gotta stop using this example, but Disney, where he's pointing at everything, they just photoshopped a cigarette out of his fingers. He's
Yeah.
smoking a cigarette and all of his things. But I
That's
mean,
funny.
that was part of J. Edgar Hoover's job. They still do it now. If you make a film about anything that happens to do, like whenever you see a government vehicle, like an Air Force hangar, or you see one of those battleship type things, the government lets you film there to use that. But they also can influence your script. And if you don't do what they say, they can just choose not to help you. And then now you're out doing a battleship thing. Like at the ending of Jurassic Park, I think it's the third one, they changed the script to say, thank God for the Marines when they were getting saved. That was not supposed to be in the script. They added that in there. Now it's small propaganda. The more extreme version, which I heard about, is the Pearl Harbor movie. When they were doing the Pearl Harbor movie, and this is just smart, you have to do this. Um, they had the woman on the ship, and you have to talk to Japan. You have to talk to the people that also are on the other side of that, and you have to verify it with them too, because you don't want to start a war. Well, one of the things that was taken out was when the girl's screaming because they're being attacked. There was a dude in the background out, like on the boat on the front of it, that got lit up with a machine gun, and he just got torn apart while this girl's talking. And Japan was like, "Cut it. No, you don't need that in there." And we said, "Okay." But there was a lot of stuff where obviously it hurt us a lot, so we were like, "We're gonna put this in there." But they've done that through lone survivors. Basically, sign up at your fucking recruitment office. It wasn't like that at all. And you can hear Marcos Luttrell explain it. It's pretty bad, but it's not like that. And it's everything like that. There's always propaganda in films. I had a guy who wrote a book called The Myth of the German Soldier. And he was reading letters of all these German soldiers. Did they really believe what they were doing? A lot of them that didn't believe in Hitler, they just believed it was a religious thing. They would try and follow that religious angle. And you even had some that were having doubts as well, too. And you just look at the propaganda at the time. Oh, these warriors, these communists drink blood and they do this. And that's where our
But that's why I
government,
think it's so hard to sort this stuff out, because there is so much other stuff that gets
everything's a
inserted
damn
into the
lie, dude.
story.
Fuck it.
Yeah.
Who
But
cares?
but I mean, now to circle back, that's kind of why I'm so skeptical of so many things. That's one of the reasons why, I choose not to believe in a lot of the religious stuff, because everything has got very confusing and convoluted. And so I just need a little bit more evidence to then be convinced of something. But there's so much speculation that you can chat about it and kind of go down these different theories. But then what do I actually believe? I don't know. I mean, I guess, is that okay? Is it okay not to say, oh yeah, I know it's
I'm fine
this
with it.
or
I think speculation's fine, but I think like, especially when it's in conversation too, but like, I mean, there's people that write books on it. There's people that write books on the Kennedy assassination about like a secret love angle. And there's people that write like a fantasy drama novel. I mean, I don't think it should be sold as a biography, and it's hard if you're trying to check the historical context of stuff. But what happens if you don't have the documentation to be able to fill that out? I think you can still talk about it. I just think shunning the conversation, like I think any idea of like, there's theories, so many theories about JFK. There's so many theories about everything, and you just start going. It's okay to listen to it. It's okay to talk about it. It's not. You don't you have to get mad at it, but obviously people feel invested because they believe that their research will be right. Like there's probably so many different theories about DB Cooper. There's probably a whole community of them that are all divided amongst so much stuff. And it's like, because you're trying to solve a mystery and another person that might get more attention than you that has a different theory, then that's going to piss you off and you're going to start being mad at that person. Like I didn't realize how divisive the JFK community was until I started talking about it. And then you get lone nutters, conspiracy theorists, they're all divided. And it's just like, I mean, I think it's just good. You got to start talking about stuff like this as well, too. I just think the influence of like propaganda and all that type of stuff. I mean, when we were at World War II against Germany, they braced us. They braced the Americans. They put up propaganda over here saying the German soldiers are all liars and they're all this and this is what this. So when Germany, like I said, back to the book I was talking about before about the myth of the German soldier. They went over to they went over to Russia or not Russia. They went over somewhere where a lot of Russian people were, and they were building churches. They were looking as good people because that's how the Germans viewed themselves, as doing a great thing, not a bad thing. And it restored in those people, okay, well, my Russian dictator's killing people and doing all this horrible stuff and not letting us be free, but these people seem okay. We were more braced for it because America braced us for that. They said these Germans will do anything to shoot you in the back. And it might be like good and bad, but it braced us to not be susceptible to this type of thing. And I think that's kind of what they ended up doing too much on our side as well, too. Now the government has done so much good and so much lying and so much this, there's a lot more skeptical people about stuff. And I think now you have people that are more willing to go down this woke movement of tearing up the government because they don't trust it because you've tried to play with their minds too much.
I think that, yeah, the consequences of speculation and theories, and that is where I think I get more concerned, because there are people who actually take real action based on what they believe to be true. Going back to talking about, a little bit about religion, is that those organizations really need to stay strong and together, and so they do a lot of things in order to maintain the integrity of the organization. It's the same as the government. The government does a lot of things to maintain the integrity of their organization. And sometimes it's okay to think, I don't really know what's true. It doesn't really matter. But in some cases, it does matter, because there are consequences for believing, at least strongly believing, in certain things. The distrust of the government, I have tons of that, because there is evidence of corruption and that sort of thing. But I wouldn't go down far enough to say that it needs to be torn down. I think that some bad stuff can be rooted out, and the really the foundation, I think, is still good. Some of the structure is good, but some of the things that fill in the gaps is really, really bad.
That's funny. That's how I think. But if you side libertarian, that's not how they think. There's like the hardcore ones that are like government needs the anarchy. I'm like,
Yeah.
no,
Oh, sure.
I think you just need to realize you're on a shitty foundation. You got to reset it, which leads to it's a two question. It's a question, but it's a two-parter. And it's a yes or a no. Do you think that we need like these myths? Do you think we need this myths in our history or in our society and all this type of stuff, like DB Cooper and like all this stuff? Do you think those are important?
Yeah, I do. I think they're important.
Then you also think we need a boogeyman as well too.
Yeah, there's a purpose for it.
So I just go, that's the whole point. I mean, if you're not at war, think it's a strategy. If you're not at war
Mhm.
and your people are going to be doing whatever you don't want them to be doing, such as looking into what your financial decisions are. Pelosi's the best example with insider trading. But you
Yeah.
start looking into things, you start really like examining what's going on over here, what's going on with our energy, what's going on with this. And it's not your official, what you want them to be looking into. You start going like, I mean, I'm surprised Epstein got so out of our damn consciousness so fucking fast, dude. You're telling me a man committed suicide, but hold on a second. He was in a private cell. Like he was in a private wing of the prison that was like basically closed down. He was the only one in there. They left the door open on him and he was able to leave basically 6 days out. He was only there one day of the week. It was Sunday. He wasn't able to leave, but he was on work release the other one where he was gone, I think 9 to 12 hours. They calculated up how much time he actually spent in prison compared to how much time he was out. And he was way out and he was paying massive amounts of money. There's a documentary about it that went through all his receipts. Like that's suspicious. If you can't question why would a man commit suicide because he's in jail, that's your answer. Well, he was only there one day, like, and asleep, and he was in a private wing.
Why do you think that such big and important stories just die off so fast?
Look at the one that's still being taught today. That's a lie. Bugliosi, look up his name. He committed perjury in the Manson trial. He put a prosecutor on the defendant's side and to sabotage the trial. They literally did not give the Manson family a chance. Whether you want to say they're crazy or not, but the whole helter skelter model it's a fantasy. He even said in an interview, and Tom O'Neill, the guy who wrote the book Chaos, expose this. And he asked $5,000 to do my show, which is like, fuck that. Maybe he'll change his mind. Tom, if you're listening, I love you. But
We need a GoFundMe.
but he did a lot of really good reporting on this, and it does link to like a lot of the JFK stuff when it comes to Julian West, because he exposed that MK Ultra stuff. And where Charles Manson was getting his drugs at was this Haight Ashbury, which was this hippie apartment complex commune thing that leads into Operation Midnight Climax, so the government
Down in
drugging
San
people.
Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, like you need a boogeyman, and you can't. You need. I mean, it's like Operation Paperclip. We forgave Nazi soldiers for, the main guy who designed our space shuttle thing. He used to hang the 5 slowest Jews out in front of his rocket lab, like just to incentivize people to work harder. Or that'll be you. And we let that guy design our spacecraft. So you get, it's either that or it's Himmler. But you get into this area where it's like, okay, dark stuff, but you got to examine it from the giant playing field. This doesn't mean that like, oh, our government's just evil. You got to look at it from the war field. If you're not doing something, your enemy's probably doing it, which means you better get on it. And if you're not going to be the best, your enemy will beat you, and then you're going to lose. Throughout our history, our government has always been this: you got to be tough on your enemy, you got to brag, you got to do the shit. And that's where you get to like Alan Dulles, who is involved in the Kennedy assassination. He's the head of the CIA. I talked to people who did, examined his whole life and wrote books about him. Everything that he did, that's, we would say, is horrible shit. You got to look at it from his eyes. I'm going to do what the people can't do to protect the country I love. And I mean, it's a, you can look at it from both sides there. I think that's how people have to examine stuff.
There's so many, motivations to do certain things, and I think having this fear of someone beating you to whatever it is. I mean, isn't that what MK Ultra originally started with? Was that they were afraid during the Cold War that the Russians were already doing all of these different experiments, and so the United States really thought that they needed to get started on it and beat them to the punch.
MK Ultra's initial plan was to be able to brainwash people to perform acts like sleeper agents. Like, now in the hearings of MK Ultra, you can look this up. They said that it was all failed. It never was successful. Now you can look at the evidence that they have, and you could say it seems successful. Well, it wasn't successful, is that they couldn't replicate it. They couldn't keep making the same thing happen every single time. Now, there is an article you can read up. It's kind of like a DB Cooper story, but her name's Candy Jones. And there's like, she was on a radio show, and her husband or whoever ran the radio station, like hypnotized her. And she went into this sleeper mode type thing. And now Julian West, if you look up his, I like I said, told you off air, if you look up his Wikipedia, he says he works for the CIA brainwashing Korean War victims. Well, there's a lot of evidence. The whole original story back then was these people that fought in this war were coming back over, and they believed that the Koreans brainwashed them to think that we used biological weapons over there. Well, what Julian West does was to unbrainwash them. New evidence, and based on the past like 5-7 years, turns out that we actually did use biological weapons there. And what Julian West was doing was brainwashing them to forget that we did that, and we broke the Geneva Code. So it was a way to cover up your tracks and things. And if you look at Julian West's background, he was a prime hypnotist, like for Stanford and all this. And Tom O'Neill got the articles from Stanford of letters from Sidney Gottlieb to Julian West. Now, Julian West in court lied and said he was never involved in MK Ultra. He also said he would sue anybody if they even alleged till he died that he was involved in it. Now, there's a guy named James Schreiker, or Schreiker, I think his name is. James Schreiker worked for the Air Force. He had these insane headaches, and his mother and I think his sister were the ones that testified for him because he couldn't. But he would get these insane, like they're like cluster headaches, migraines. And basically, he's getting treated by Julian West for these migraines. He wakes up basically. What happened was, it was around midnight. There was a family. It was like a hot day, basically a hot night. And what this family did was they went to this bar, and they had their 3-year-old and another little kid, I think a little bit older, out front of this bar playing. The James Schreiker guy doesn't remember any of this, but wakes up. He's covered in scratches and blood. He ended up raping this girl, the 3-year-old girl, and killing her. And he gets shipped to the sheriff's department. A military vehicle comes by, picks him up. He's gone 3 hours and comes back and doesn't remember a single thing. They tested his body with alcohol. He had a little bit of alcohol, not enough to be drunk, though. He doesn't remember a single thing of it. And what they think is that they brainwashed him. So, like I said, the whole point of MK Ultra was brainwashing people to do these. What happened is they'd give you a shit ton of LSD and it would try and test it on people. Like that's what Operation Midnight Climax was, dropping it in people's drinks and having them go nuts. But that eventually became, they couldn't replicate it to a science to where they realized,
they couldn't systematize it.
well, they realized using other drugs, not just LSD, there was other drugs like the Patty Hearst kidnappings linked in. I had a guy explain that on my show before. They had another type of chemical. I think it's sodium something. It's like a truth serum type thing. Well, they could, another similar one that does kind of the opposite, and makes you just forget shit like a roofie. And so they couldn't replicate it 100%. So they realized if you talk to anybody who studies LSD or talks about taking LSD, they talk about this trip that's hard to put into words. The government found that out, realized they couldn't replicate this thing anymore. So what they just learned how to do was give you so much that it shatters your reality. That's why they tested them in the beginning at mental patients, people that even if they could tell you, you wouldn't believe them because they were just mental patients.
They were crazy already.
So that's where you see them testing people in jail. You're not going to believe a prisoner. And then eventually they put it into their contract where they talked about, like, if you work for the military, they could just test it on you. You know, like, you work for us, you'll do whatever we say. And then that's when a lot of military people were involved in it too. I mean, I have a paper that talked about LSD interrogations during the whole JFK thing. And they talk about, we could revive some old methods from the Rockefeller Commission, which is mail intercepts and LSD interrogations. It's a document that says it right there. So it's real. They've done it for a while. And it actually inspired a documentary. A guy, Frank Olson, who worked with these guys, got dosed. And he was like, he freaked out. He couldn't handle it. And he said, like, he wanted to leave. And they were like, he knows too much. And they invited him to 11th story of a building. And then he falls out of a suicide high on LSD. So, like, he made statements, and his son, I think it's Eric Olson, made a documentary. It's all about his story, and he's suing the CIA right now, and it's called Wormwood. I think it's called
Wormwood. Yeah,
I went deep. I'm sorry, I ranted a little bit there.
No, because like MK Ultra is very fascinating in just how many people participated in it and didn't know that they were participating by doing research. You know, the universities doing research. They were doing stuff, you know, like you were saying, in prisons on prisoners, and they didn't know, the prisoners didn't even know what was going on. You know, I remember there was like a massive list of all the different chemicals and drugs that they were trying to use in these processes of trying to control people and help them, you know, forget stuff and be able to go and do things for the government and then not remember that they had done any of those things. That story of raping that girl that's really scary. I mean, the idea of a roofie, and you have no recollection of anything that happened after you took it, up to, you know, a certain window of time. For me, that's like terrifying. I always want to know what's going on.
Did you look it up? It's called the James Schreiker incident. It's by Tom O'Neill. It's on the Intercept's website. But I say, if that's your baseline, then when we talk about like deep state and all that, that's your fucking baseline, man. Just put it there. And the fact that they haven't corrected the official statements about any of this, or haven't even bothered to refute it or make a public statement about it. There was hearings, and then that was it. And the people that were in those hearings lied. So now you have the evidence and the documentation that these people said they never communicated. Now you have the letters back and forth where, like, you did communicate with them, but those people are dead. So it's like, I think at this point, you just, like, it's okay to be skeptical. Like, Jesus Christ, like skepticize away. Holy hell.
Yeah, no, and that's why I'm the way I am. I'm so skeptical of all this stuff. I'm very fascinated to listen, but I have a hard time settling on anything, which kind of, I think that's
as
a
long
good
as
thing.
you're with the MK Ultra stuff and you understand it. Like, that's not conspiracy. That's
yeah,
real.
that's real. There's been so much that's come out since that it just confirms it.
And
And
it's still being verified. I try to get some survivors on my show. There are some where I'm like, I don't know if this is a survivor or someone looking for attention. There's a popular picture. One of the girls actually advocates for trying to like get it transparency on these. It's her head. She's like 7 years old. It's her whole head and body. She's strapped to a board basically, and they have her head taped and everything. And all the signs around her say "Stop urine," which was like, I guess, short for stop, like trying to brainwash her to stop peeing the bed or something like that. And they talked like there was a woman that was drugged while she was pregnant, and the guy who was in the womb is like, he's like 30 now, and he's like advocating like his life's messed up and like a bunch of stuff. And I mean, whether that's a person looking for money, but they did experiment on, you know, her. And that's what I'm saying is like when we say like conspiracy, like there's enough evidence came out, but look how many people have been saying things. Like people were raising, Alex Jones was raising the alarm on Epstein before Epstein even happened.
well, a lot of that conspiracy stuff is really the cover up to a lot of these actions, and it just introduces a lot of other details that would throw people off and start to believe something else. But having documents released over time, I mean, I think when I don't know what the time period is, how, 60 years or whatever it is that the government has before they will release documents. But then you can still see that a lot of stuff is redacted, and not everything is released.
They're like 70 years past JFK, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that one is such a mess, anyway. But, um, I always thought that, yeah, there would be at some point where you would learn the truth. But I think that's part of my early, like, upbringing, where I believed that there was, a heaven, and that at the end time, God would reveal to you all truth. And so I grew up always having this idea that you would eventually figure out or find out what was true, because someone would then reveal it to you. And the reality of life is it's not that way. You have to like sort through it, and you may not ever know.
as long as they're
Yeah.
not like killing you or doing anything weird like that. Like there are some churches where it's like you're sitting in it, you're like, yo, you ever see that movie Father Stew with Mark Wahlberg?
No, it's on my Netflix watch list. I think it's on
Don't,
Netflix.
don't,
Yeah.
don't. It's
Oh, is it? It's not
it's
good.
he's trying to become a priest and he dies at like 50 because he has some rare disease that happens. And he's like, it's this whole movie about like, it's basically like a giant thing of like, you need to pray in God and believe. Mel Gibson's in it, which
It's
is
not a
nice.
comedy.
I don't
It's not a
think that's it.
comedy.
I know.
Oh,
It,
then I'm
it,
not interested.
it
I
was like,
watched him and Kevin Hart on their recent movie, and
that's a
I
good
just
one.
thought that was really funny.
Yeah, it's basically
I
like
need more
Lone
comedy in my
Survivor,
life.
but a priest.
Gotcha, gotcha. No, I like the comedy versions of these things, and it's gets too serious. I'm just not
I
interested.
just want them to make a good movie that is about like Bohemian Grove and stuff. Like make a comedy. The Pentaveret was good with Mike
Oh yeah, Mike
Myers.
Myers. Yeah, I thought that was really funny too. I don't know what I mean. Mike Myers, he hasn't been around a whole lot in like movies lately, but when I saw that come out, I was like, oh, I'm totally gonna watch this. And then I had
Yeah.
to go back and watch all of his other, Austin Powers movies.
That's why I said Scotty Doe when he joined the thing, because that's from Goldmember.
I love that.
I don't know. I
That's
wish
funny.
we actually had real supervillains like that. Like I wish that would be so much easier than like all the lies and all the government being your thing. I'd rather just have like we have a superhero and then we have a supervillain. You know what I mean? Like just a James Bond type and then Octopussy. Like
Yeah, life shouldn't be so much like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, you
yeah,
know?
twists and turns, and every time you
Mhm.
rewatch it, it's just shit.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know I have, like I said, the boogeyman thing. I think that's very, very real. And I think it's important. I think you look at a lot of stuff and you start realizing, why is there government roots to this thing? And it's like, well, you're not at war, man. And you got to think, you got to create an enemy so the people will be satisfied. And it's like, it's everyone's looking for a Jesus on a cross or they're looking for a devil to burn, man. And that's in every single aspect of our life. If it's an argument, someone's got to be the loser, someone's got to be the winner. My biggest issue with lawyers, why is trying to find the truth a lie? Why is it all a game? You realize that the
Yeah, it's about
person,
winning.
the person who's so I had a spam call that kept calling me. I read the number on air. It's called me 4 times while I've talked to you, but it calls me like 16 times a day, and it's just an AI
Mhm.
that's really smart. And actually,
Mhm.
should we call her on here?
I ended up getting the AT&T call blocker security thing going so that I could just ignore, because I have tons of them.
I'm gonna fucking call this thing. I gotta make sure I don't like. Hold on.
Yeah, what are you gonna get yourself into? Are they gonna like tell all their AI buddies, and now your phone's gonna really blow up?
Thank you for calling. This is Harriet with Rent to Own Now. How can I help you today?
I'm looking for a home.
We called you earlier regarding affording your own home and how we can assist you on improving your credit. We work with a rent-to-own program that's designed to help people who are really serious about becoming homeowners, but just don't have a high enough credit score at the time to qualify for a mortgage loan. Do you know what your credit score is? Is it above or below 680?
It's below.
Okay, so let me just explain a little more about the homes we have and what we do. The home listings are nationwide and they're updated daily, so I don't have any specific details on that property in front of me. But what I'll do, if it's all right with you, is send you a link to our listing website, and then you can get all of the property details as well as see the other homes in your area, okay?
I don't know why, but it changes every time. And one of the things she asked me, but this number called me 15, 20 times. Sorry for anybody listening, but here's to the main point. So it goes, is there anything on maybe your record or anything that would be holding you back from getting a home? And I just go, I represented OJ in the trial. Is that going to be a problem? And then it just hung up on me. It just hung up on me. But it calls
it doesn't
like 15,
know how to respond.
It calls 15, 16 times a day. And I'm glad I played it on air because I had to put conference calls with my friends. I'm like, this is fucking real. I'm not crazy. And they would talk to her and she would change her answers every time. Like it would slowly learn. And then eventually it was like, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And then it would just hang up. But I would say things like, oh my God, somebody call 911. There's blood everywhere. And it would just, it would just say goodbye and then hang up. But then eventually I called it and it just would be like, this number is no longer available. And it was like, oh, and then it just started calling me.
They blocked you.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah. AI is a crazy thing, especially when they program it in such a way where it really does start to learn. You know, it learns how to change responses based on other things. Yeah, that's AI is a whole other beast.
She didn't have a response for the OJ thing.
Yeah.
That could have stopped me from getting a home. That was just, to me, that was hilarious. I laughed for like 10 minutes after I said that and it just hung up because I was like, that's great because she didn't go any farther into that.
Is there, I mean, I guess people do kind of screw with like Alexa and Siri and some of these others, but I just wonder if there's like some safe AI out there that you could kind of screw with and see how it kind of develops, you know, play around with a little bit and see how smart it becomes.
I've talked to some of the top AI people on here, and one person who studies existential risk. He's a top name. It's like Roman Yampolovich. I forgot his thing. He was very direct. Like it was like a 50-minute interview, and I would just be like, "So what do you think about AI taking over?" And he'd be like, "It's going to happen," and that would be it. And then you'd have to ask another question. He was a good guy, but he just was probably tired of talking about it. But he talked about there's a thing called the Oracle, which is like this, like at the ending of the Pentaveret series, there's that everything turns like white and it's like this, it's the spirit of that guy, but he's the AI thing now. That is a real thing that they think. And what they talked about is creating an AI that just suggests stuff rather than actually causing change or doing anything. And then if you watch Robots versus Humans, the series on Netflix, there's an episode which you would really like, but the robots are exploring Earth and they go to all the different sides, and all the different sides are political parties, and it shows you like the Republicans, they all like shot each other with shotguns and they're all like all this, and then like the Democrats, they were so like, you know, invested into one thing that they ended up eating each other doing that. Then the libertarians were out at sea, but they programmed everything to work by robots, so when the EMP happened, they couldn't lower their fishing nets and they all died. And it's like
what is this called?
It's called it's either Death, Love, and Humans or something like that. It's something like that with humans. It's on Netflix. Each episode is different. So each episode is created by another like writer or artist. And then it's a whole, none of them continue together, but there's different animation styles and all this type of stuff. It's pretty good.
Love, Death plus Robots. Yeah. I'm gonna add that to my list. I'm curious.
But dude, it's definitely there's some episodes where you're like, well, this does not go with the other one at all. Like I watched a whole Scottish guy who was like he literally dressed up in a kilt and everything, and there was a rat in his barn, and he hired this like dog or cat or thing to kill it. And then eventually the rats learned and they killed his cat. So then he starts having this war with these rats where he's putting bombs and traps and they destroy everything. So he keeps upgrading to the top like robots to kill these things. Then he upgrades the turret systems, and then they all did it. And then he goes in there to settle it himself with a shotgun. And one of the rats are attacking this thing, and he's watching them all get murdered. And he starts killing the machines, and he starts befriending these rats, and they drink whiskey together at the ending. Dude, they're like 30-minute episodes, but each one is like it's a mind screw. You're like, what is happening right now?
Wow. That is okay. So you've convinced me. I'm gonna watch it.
It's definitely good. It's like the Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
I mean, it just seems like that. Oh, that's good too. That has like a really weird. I think I watched it when that first came out, but it has like a weird pathway of these little like mini stories. I think, right?
Yeah, it's a bunch of different stories, and that's what the episodes are.
Yeah, I think that might be podcast content.
What, Ballad of Buster Scruggs?
Well, no. Well, like all these different types of episodes that you're talking about.
You could definitely examine them. There's some that are like really out there.
Yeah. That's funny. I know. Well, I mean, your show is a little bit formatted differently than mine. Although there's a little bit of like conversational type stuff, but I'm always looking for like different topics and stuff, and it's always funny because when I talk to you, then all of a sudden all these little bells go off in my head. I gotta write that one down.
It's the best part of conversation. But Scott, we've been talking for a good bit, man. Do you want to promote where people can find your show and people can listen to each episode?
Yeah, so Never Too Serious is the podcast. You can find us on YouTube currently, Spotify, and pretty much any other place that you want to catch your podcast. We do record in video, so you can actually watch it on Spotify.
All right. Well, I'm going to link it all in the description. I'm a fan of the show. Glad he's back and promoting episodes again. And thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.